Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing remarkably well. I'm doing great, thank you very much, and I'm so thrilled you've joined me tonight to listen to a lovely story, because I've got a fabulous story for you, and this is part 2 of our story tonight. So if you haven't heard part 1, make sure you go back to it, and then you can enjoy the full story. So let's continue with tonight's story, but before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's get started with tonight's story. I hastily dashed down the passage as fast as a March hare, with Prunella running behind me. I eagerly thrust open the front door to greet the advancing officer, who was just about to knock. I'm so excited that I'm about to run and leap into my husband's arms to welcome him back. But my eagerness is suddenly subdued, well, almost instantaneously. There's something distinctly off about my husband. He appears sombre, tentative, rather flustered. I notice he has a limp in his leg, and when he ambles to the door, he doesn't look like the Graham I know so well and love. Me and Prunella stare at him in abject horror, barely recognising him. My husband's eyes are black and blue, swollen, puffy and heavily bruised, almost as if someone's punched him directly in the eyes. I can see he's been badly scratched up and has taken a serious beating, as there are vertical ridges across his face, along his neck and collarbone, as if something with sharp talons has literally pierced his skin wide open. I notice there's dried blood on his scalp, and tufts of hair are missing on his head. I observe that Graham looks so dithery, discombobulated, glassy-eyed. He stares at me vacantly, with an ambiguously vague, rather blank look, and a nebulous expression on his face, almost as if he doesn't know who the hell I actually am. There's nothing more terrifying than seeing the person you know and love, seemingly unable to recognise you at all. "Officer," I say, looking at him befuddled, "what on earth has happened? What's wrong with my husband? Why does he seem so spaced out?" "All in due time, Mrs. Ferris. All in due time. Your husband is exceedingly exhausted. I think you need to put him to bed right now, and then we'll have a good talk. We've just come back from the hospital. Your husband's been given the all clear. He needs plenty of rest, I'm told." "All clear? Are you kidding me, officer? Look at him. Look how spaced out he is. He looks like he's on another planet." "He just needs time," says the officer. "Had a rather bad blow to the head, which has made him rather woolly-headed, but he is going to recover." I take my husband into the bedroom. He flops down into the bed like a rag doll. He looks so exhausted, so tired. He looks confused and disorientated, shutting his puffy eyes, giving me a rather bleary look. I kiss him on his cheek, roll back his hair to stroke his forehead affectionately. "What the hell happened to you, sweetheart? Oh, I'm so glad you're home. Thank God you're alive. I've been worried sick about you." My husband doesn't respond. He slips into a deep slumber. I can see he's so fatigued, so incredibly overwhelmed. When I return to my well-appointed, very cosy living room, the officer beckons for me to sit down on the upholstered chair, the one closest to the fireplace. "Well, this is what we know," he says, stroking his moustache reflectively. "A young couple on the Appalachian Trail found your husband wandering around aimlessly. He was groggy and dazed, very confused. The couple are both medics, so it was very fortunate. Husband's a doctor, the wife's a nurse. So they took him to hospital to run some cognitive tests and scans on him. By all accounts, the doctors believe that your husband, Graham, has been viciously beaten up by a wild animal. It looks suspiciously like a bear attack, given the bite marks and scratches on his torso and head. But your husband is currently suffering from concussion and a light amnesia. But he did remember his name for a very short while. Then he forgot it all over again. It's almost like his memory is a rusty battery, firing up occasionally, and then going static and losing its momentum, you could say. The doctors say for a man that's been gone for well over a week, he's extremely well nourished, well hydrated, and his wounds have healed up remarkably well. There are no infections, but it looks like there was a green stuff all over his wounds and gashes, as if he's been rubbing some antibacterial plant over himself.
They also say his tongue was a bright green colour. Whatever the ointment was he used on himself, it has almost certainly prevented any infection. I imagine it must be down to his wilderness survival skills. Your husband clearly knows his plants. Needless to say, Miss Ferris, your husband is in a remarkably good way for someone so desperately muddled and thrown badly off balance. Suffice to say, his concussion is only temporary, but it'll take a while for him to fully heal. He's taken quite a beating. We cannot find your husband's camping site or any of his gear, so I think he may have wandered off the trail for a more private camping spot. There were campers who reported seeing him late on Saturday afternoon, the day that he left your home. They said he was exceedingly aloof, not particularly friendly, and he couldn't get away from the camping ground fast enough. In regards to your husband's truck, the mystery, I am glad to say, has finally been solved. Your husband left the door to his vehicle unlocked. 2 young kids took it for a joyride until they used up all his petrol. We found the truck abandoned, but one of the boys left his wallet inside the truck, so we were able to trace him. I think there must be something in the water enabling people to become exceedingly scatty and forgetful at the moment. Your husband failing to lock the car door, and one of the joyriders leaving behind his wallet.
Oh, on that, officer, I must defend my husband. Graham was probably so lethargic. He forgot to lock the truck door behind him. Let's just say our screaming baby made us both exceedingly burnt out and listless. You become incredibly dopey when you're drowsy. Believe me, I know. You can become careless, you drop things, break things, forget what you were supposed to buy at the grocery store. You sometimes can't even remember the day of the week, let alone the hour.
I understand, ma'am. You don't need to explain yourself any more to me. I know it hasn't been easy for you, but your husband's back home now, and all you need to do now is to devote your attention to helping him recover.
Thank you, officer. Thank you so much for your help.
It's a pleasure, Mrs. Ferris. I'm only doing my job. Just glad this has had a happy ending. But word of advice, Mrs. Ferris, if your husband goes away next time, it might be rather a good idea to find out his whereabouts.
I hardly think this is ever going to happen again, officer. I've learnt my lesson the hard way.
I hope it won't happen again, Mrs. Ferris. I will show myself out. Best of luck to the both of you.
I'm glad to say that slowly and surely my husband began to recover from his experience. But for 2 weeks he couldn't remember what had happened to him. And then one night he sat up, bolt upright in bed, and recounted the whole story to me of what had happened that inauspicious day, as his memories came flooding back. Not in dribs and drabs as you might have expected, but the entire account. The mystery of his unorthodox experience on the Appalachian Trail, now fully revealed. But this was not the incredulous story that I was actually expecting to hear. Graham's account. Nobody tells you how tough it is to become first-time parents. And from the moment we brought our baby home from the hospital, as beautiful as she was, I regret to say that she had a pair of lungs on her that could make an ambulance siren sound like a little tinkle. Within no time at all sleep abandoned us, as every 2 hours during the night, our baby would scream, scream, and scream. I would become so frustrated. I would arrive at work looking half dead, my face ashen, dark circles under my eyes. By all accounts, my work was suffering, as I yawned tirelessly during the day, and was perpetually forgetting things, and everyone was telling me I didn't look at all good. Let's just say that the wife was frustrating me immensely, as the moment our baby started to scream, she would groan, climb out of bed, and pander to our baby daughter all the time, which only encouraged our infant to scream all the more. I tried to pull the sheet over my head and get some sleep, but all these woeful disturbances caused my sleep to become very broken. "Don't go to her," I would tell my wife. "If you keep responding to her every time she screams, then she's going to make a habit of this behaviour. But if you ignore her, she might just shut up, and we'll get some decent shut-eye." "I can't do that, Graham," my wife had hissed. "She might need feeding or comforting." It didn't help when my wife's friend, Angeline, with a baby that's a similar age to our daughter, seemed to gloat when she commented on how tired we looked. "You poor things! You look so dreadfully shattered. I'm so lucky with little Amelia here. Oh, she gives me no trouble at all. She sleeps through the night like a charm. She's so incredibly well behaved. You poor things! I'm so glad I'm not like you."
"It sounds to me, Angeline, like you are the most perfect mother,"
I say sarcastically. But Angeline has no idea I'm being sarcastic and giggles. "Well, I have been told I am a natural. Everybody thinks my baby is so well behaved. Well, you know, it's about being a sensitive mother, in tune with your baby's needs, stuff like that."
"Well, you seem to have it down to a fine art, Angeline, don't you?"
Me and my wife had visited our doctor to check that there was nothing wrong with our baby. We were informed that she was in excellent health.
"She's always screaming," I explained to the doctor. "Surely there must be a problem here." "I'm very sorry to hear that, Mr. Ferris. You do have my greatest sympathy. I wish there was something we could do about it. It's not easy for first-time parents like yourself. A baby screaming all the time is not good for one's health. Some babies are just much more vocal than others. Maybe she'll grow out of it."
Suffice to say, the screaming got worse and worse. At 2 a.m. on a Saturday morning, me and my wife had an altercation. I think my nerves were frayed. I was sick of the incessant non-stop screaming. It just wouldn't stop. I was the one that now wanted to scream in frustration. I will confess there were days I secretly wished I didn't have to actually return home to my wife and child. I knew what lay in store for me. A night of hell, where I would languor in a sluggish somnolence. I'd have loved nothing better than to book into a hotel for a couple of nights, just to get some rejuvenating, refreshing sleep, to overcome my lassitude.
"Please come back to bed,"
I shouted at my wife.
"You're making everything so much worse."
"Don't tell me what to do," she says, the tears springing down her cheeks. "I have to look after our baby. You're being so unreasonable, Graham. You don't know what it's like being a mother. She's always screaming. She just doesn't stop."
"It's tough on me too, sweetheart. Now come back to bed."
"No, I won't. I have to attend to the baby."
"Well, I can't get sleep with you bustling around like this. You're keeping everybody wide awake."
"Well, it's not my problem. I'm the one that has to look after the baby 24/7. All you do is come home and crash."
"I've had enough. I'm going. I don't need to listen to you going on and on like this. I can't take it a moment longer. I've had enough. I've had enough of all this screaming. I've had enough of you getting up in the middle of the night, keeping me wide awake. I don't get a wink of sleep. Everybody in the office is commenting on how dreadful I look." I grabbed my camping gear at 2:30 in the morning and trudged towards the front door. "Go then," screams my wife. "See if I care."
I must confess, once I was in the truck, driving to the parking lot at Springer Mountain, where the hiking trail begins, I felt a huge sense of relief about getting away from my little baby's raucous screams. I felt like a pressure cooker that had reached boiling point and was about to explode. I will confess I did feel guilty, leaving my wife alone with the baby to look after, but I simply wasn't functioning properly with so little sleep. The spontaneous last-minute camping trip seemed like a great idea. I needed a break from the chaotic mayhem of daily life, to breathe in some crisp fresh air, to get some quality sleep and exercise. I know I may sound incredibly selfish. My wife was also having a tough time, and I realised that. But I figured if I had some rest, I'd be able to help her out better with the baby later on. One thing I did know was we couldn't go on like this anymore, or we'd be swallowed alive by our fatigation. Fortunately, I also made absolutely sure that I always had my backpack fully stocked up with freeze-dried food and drinks should me and my wife be seized with a spontaneous impulsive desire to go camping again. When I was younger, and the weight of the world was getting on top of me, I always liked to escape to the mountains. I remember when I was 18 years old, my parents actually thought I'd gone missing, as I'd taken off on a trip on the Appalachian Trail.
They had absolutely no idea where I was.
I think the note I left must have been blown out the window or accidentally thrown away with the trash, but I do remember leaving them a note. But they never believed my claims, thinking that only in hindsight was I exercising remorse when I suddenly realised the undue stress I'd actually caused them, as they had recruited search parties to look for me. I was so disappointed that they doubted me in this regard. As I drive along, I barely notice the scenery, as it's ambiguously bathed in a dark carpet of indeterminate obscurity, as the night has literally laid claim to the environment, swallowing its definitive details in a single gargantuan mouthful, and leaving behind the vague, rather shadowy silhouettes of the trees and vegetation, so that beyond my headlight that lights up the road ahead of me, complemented by a faint spattering of moonlight, I can barely see much at all. I arrive at Springer Mountain parking lot at about 3:30 in the morning, and dutifully park my truck. I then climb in the back of my truck and throw out the sleeping bag. Once I'm lying beneath its warm folds, let's just say sleep confiscates my consciousness and consumes me within almost seconds, demanding that I'm lost in the world of dreams, where I can find the sweet bouquet of rejuvenation for my body. I am awoken in the morning by soft shafts of sunlight, sprinkling their warm rays over my eyes, nudging my cheeks. I wake up feeling incredibly cramped from sleeping in the back of the truck in an awkward position. I rise up out of my sleeping bag to stretch my legs and prepare for my hike. I was about to phone my wife to tell her that I was at Springer Mountain car park and was about to proceed on my merry way. I wanted to tell her that she could expect me back on Sunday evening. I also wanted to apologise profusely for our altercation, as I felt my behaviour towards her had been rather unreasonable. My heart sinks when I realised I'd left my cell phone at home. I was here now. I wasn't going to go back for it. It had taken me an hour to get here, and I assumed my wife would know I'd gone camping. She'd seen me ambling off with my camping gear, so I knew she'd assume that I'd be back on Sunday night. She knew on Monday morning that I had some important meetings with overseas clients that I couldn't afford to miss, so I'd be back by then. It was a prepossessing day, dappled in a warm, inviting energy. Spring was on the horizon. The days were becoming gradually lighter and warmer. I proceeded along my journey. I was greeted to the dignified, lofty figures of the trees, rather like statuesque centurions. They were still bare from their autumn shedding, their thin, bombastic tree trunks penciling up into the sky in an upward trajectory, although some tree trunks curvaceously bent over at interesting sculptural angles. I noticed the bougainvilleas were full of leaves, and there were some trees that had welcomed the spring earlier than most, their branches sprinkled with a vibrant leafy regalia. It looks as if within a couple of weeks the forest is going to come alive with blossom. The earthen floor is richly carpeted with deep heaps of crisp fallen autumn leaves. I'm following the White Blazer Trail, where I tend to go beyond Hawk Mountain Shelter and find somewhere off the beaten track to camp for the night. It was pretty cold at about 37 degrees, but I knew the day would gradually heat up, and as my body warmed, I was likely to be shedding some clothing pretty soon. I found myself encountering water crossings where ribbons of gurgling water ran through the trail, bespeckled with large rocks that rose through the water like unyielding water lilies, or the cobbles of an old-fashioned path that were very easy to navigate and cross over. The rugged trail embraced meandering rocky outcrops and embankments, but with so little underbrush, I was able to fully appreciate the dark tree limbs against the blue sky, which twinkled through the canopy in a beguiling, gleaming light. It felt so good to be here alone, with the tweets and trills of the forest birds, that easily uplifted my spirits. The only other noise I could hear was the thumping of my boots on the forest floor. It was wonderful to empty my thoughts, not to think about anything at all, apart from drinking in the breathtaking scenery and sipping the pleasant bouquet of the fresh air, laced with the scent of pine and earth. I crossed a narrow bridge over a beautiful stream, where tall trees stood like magniloquent giants over the water's edge, while it obstreperously swept over the rocky boulders at a boisterous speed. But things got a lot more dramatic when further along the trail I encountered a masterful waterfall,
where fast-flowing white water energetically cascaded over the rocky outcrops, with a high-spirited ebullience, thundering down the woodland trail, crashing over other rocks with a rambunctious tenacity that knew no restraint. I sat down at this point to refresh myself with some liquid sustenance. A bottle of Mountain Dew that was warm but refreshing. I finally reached the Hawk Mountain shelter, where there are several little tents camped out there in the late afternoon, and an ablution block for campers to use. I couldn't wait to get away from this place as fast as I possibly could. I didn't want to be around other people. I wanted to spend some lonesome quality time with myself, to reconnect with nature, so I deliberately moved way off the beaten track. I know the trail incredibly well, so I'm not afraid of getting lost. In the morning I'll have to walk back the way I came. It's a pity that I can't be here longer, but it can't be helped. I'm needed back in the offices on Monday and Tuesday, and if I don't return home tomorrow, I know my wife will worry about me. I bask in the pleasantness of the late afternoon, when the sun begins to set. Its bright tangerine beams penetrate the canopy, covering all the scenery in a shimmering glaze. I quickly set up my tent for the night, where I found a fabulous clearing overlooking the stream that literally crashed over the rocks, making such a soothing, comforting sound. I put some bottles of Mountain Dew in this ice-cold water for it to get lovely and cold. I gather some firewood and collect some water to make myself a meal. My body is aching all over after the arduous trek, but I feel invigorated, refreshed and inspired. The day has been marvellously beautiful, the scenery arresting, and although I feel exhausted in a good way, as if the stress of the last few months has been wiped away. I realise how much I needed this adventure, how I wish my wife could be here with me right now. She would have loved this. I try not to think about her, as I know that I will be filled with guilt and self-loathing, and that will ruin the tranquility of this blissful moment. I have in mind when I get home I will have a lot of making up to do, flowers to buy, a date night to organise, and a babysitter are almost certainly on the cards, and maybe even a weekend away without the baby. I could get my mother to take care of our child. Before long I have a fire going, and the water boiling in a pot. I watch the flames crackling, spitting. It audaciously burns the dry wood I collected with a zealous vigour. The fire is pleasingly warm, since the temperature has dropped significantly. There's an icy chill in the air. Some of the tree branches are jiggling in the breeze, while a soft moonlight twinkles through the branches. It's a beautiful night, serenaded by the sounds of crickets and frogs, and the occasional owl. I prepare myself my freeze-dried meal, reminding myself to get this flavour again. It's chicken a la king with rice, and it's absolutely delicious. But then again, when you're tired and hungry, everything tastes good under the stars. But I bet in my kitchen at home it wouldn't taste half as good. As the night rolls steadily forward, I feel my tiredness hijack my attention, as my lids involuntarily begin to close, and like a wilting alpine flower in the meadow, I move over to my sleeping bag, and the moment I hit the pillow, I immediately slip off into a peaceful slumber. I'm awoken in the middle of the night to blowing sounds, mouth clicks and grunts. Instead of reacting in a way the sharper version of myself would have done, I quickly retreat out of my tent, flashing my torchlight around, and that's when I see the largest black bear I've ever seen in my life. This bear is as large as a grizzly, without exaggeration. It's enormous. It does not possess the reticence of many black bears I've encountered before. They will often run away from human beings. The creature becomes incensed when the light of my torch bounces over his face. It runs towards me on all four legs, ambushing me, bounding over to me. The creature snarls, bares its teeth, and then stands up on its hind legs. My heart is thundering. I want to scream. I want to run, but I can't. The bear grabs me, flings me onto the ground. He's biting me with his canine teeth, lashing out at me with his sharp claws. The pain is excruciating as every muscle in my body cringes from this unfortunate attack. I decide to play dead, clasping my hands over my head and acting like I'm no longer in life. I loosen my arms and body so that it flops like a rag doll. But this grunting creature is not easily fooled. He continues to lash out at me, biting into my flesh, tearing into me with his claws.
I'm now absolutely certain I'm living on borrowed time. I'm not going to survive the surreal event. I quickly think back to the camping site. It's funny what you think about when you're about to face your death. I privately sniggered about thinking how glad I was not to be camping with all those people. Now the idea of having camped there holds great appeal to me, but it's all too late. I'm about to die. All I can think of is my beautiful wife, and even our screaming baby doesn't seem quite so bad after all. I have no doubt I'm going to not survive this altercation. That's when I hear a low, deep, guttural growl. My first thought is that this night could not get any more worse, even if it tried. I had dreadful visions of a mountain lion loitering in the shadowy undergrowth, only too eager to finish off what the bear had started. Could things get any worse than this? I didn't think so.
Please, God,
I cry out in my heart.
Please don't let me die. Please help me. Please, I can't die.
I hear a loud growl again, and then this most raucous scream that sounds like a woman being murdered. The bear takes off in a frantic frenzy. Unfortunately, after the heavyweight lashings I received across my head, at this crucial point in time, I'm beginning to see stars. But I'm still aware of my surroundings, and of course of what has just transpired. And my body feels as battered as an old camping chair that has lost all its bones. I sense this tall, rather lofty creature hovering over me, her eyes filled with concern as she examines me. I catch a glimpse of this human-looking face staring down at me, and I'm immediately filled with a tranquil peace. The next thing I know is that this idiosyncratic creature, with a human-looking face, bundles me into her arms and carries me gently. I don't feel any jolts or bumps, because if I did, I know it would have been agonizing. I'm so tired. I don't need to keep fighting anymore, I tell myself. I can surrender to sleep, because I'm just so tired, so very, very tired. Over the course of that week, I have no concept of time, as days drifted into days and nights slipped by very fast. I was only vaguely aware of my environment when I had a sense that there were people around me who spoke in a strange foreign language that I was not familiar with. It sounded like an ancient dialect that incorporated many cliques. It was a male and female that were talking together. Their voices were earnest, and I sensed they were talking about me. These people loved to engage in conversation, which was intense, for they had a lot to say. I could often feel hands on my body, and something was constantly being rubbed over my wounds that would rarely sting. Even though I was so out of things, I was aware of all these sensations. I also would find honey water being dribbled on my tongue, and then this bitter stuff that tasted vile was also put into my mouth. I had the sense I was lying on something rather soft in a dark, airy room, where a light would creep in during the morning, casting its soft shadows. I would be covered with something warm that didn't smell too pleasant, but it certainly kept the cold out, and I could feel a fire crackling away not too far from me, filling this room with warmth. I knew it was a fire because I could hear the cracks and the spits and the hisses that you get from a fire. I was also comforted by the voices in the background, reminded me that wherever I was perfectly safe. I was sentiently heedful and cognizant of my surroundings, rather like a blind person might be aware of the space they occupy, without actually seeing a single thing. Sometimes your senses can actually do the seeing for you. Let's just say I remained sufficiently disconnected that I couldn't waken from my slumber, although I could move my hands and feet, but it was like the lights in my house were permanently off during this rather mysterious, baffling period. I was unconscious for most of this time, so much so that my moments of perceptive awareness were rather brief. I didn't think about my wife, my baby, my job, my home, or even my life. In truth, I'm not sure I remembered my past, and I couldn't even consider a future or recall my own name, which was rather confusing. But I remember accepting that conundrum, as if it really didn't matter a jot. I didn't worry or fret about insignificant concerns. In this very relaxed, tranquil, peaceful state of mind, I existed in the present moment, and accepted everything that was happening around me, although I didn't understand or comprehend it at all. There was one wakeful moment that I woke up,
and was sure I must be dreaming. I found myself staring up at the rocky sculptural walls of a cave. It was dark in the cave, but a light in the ceiling from a sizable crack filtered in the room. I looked down at myself to discover I was covered in what I am convinced was a bear pelt that smelt rarely mink, but it was lovely and warm. The floor of the cave was covered in animal skins, and there was a circular fire pit placed directly under the crack in the cave wall, in order to allow the smoke from a fire to rise through the crevices. I noticed there were large sculptural stones in the cave that looked like they were being used as chairs and tables. I remember thinking to myself that my comprehensible dream was so much more effulgently lucid than my usual dreams are. I never wanted to wake up from this dream. It was so wonderful. I could smell, feel, and see in this dream in such vivid detail, although I could sense the uncomfortable spasms of pain in my body, and those I did not appreciate. I looked down on myself to see that my bed is made up of thousands of leaves that have been pressed down with animal pelts. It is then that I see this bed is like a king-size bed, and at its furthest end is a large black bundle that's lying in a fetal position. For a second, I think that creature must be a bear. The creature is a light sleeper because it rises up on 2 feet and steadily walks over to me. It's 8 foot tall, 600 to 700 pounds, covered in long flowing hair that is as dark as a raven's feathers. The creature has small pert breasts, overlong arms, and is built so powerfully. I'm convinced she could actually lift up a car without even breaking a sweat. I look at the creature in confounded confusion, as I realise my dream is becoming so much more dramatic. Then I realise that what I'm seeing is a Bigfoot that is staring down at me, with bright brown eyes that look delighted to see that mine have finally opened. But I close my eyes again, drifting off into sleep, believing that what I've observed had to have been a dream. I hear the unorthodox creatures talking excitedly among themselves. They're talking about me. I'm sure of that. I begin to wake up more and more frequently and become more aware of my surroundings. I realise I'm sharing a cave with a male and female Bigfoot, and as bizarre as this may sound, it feels like the most natural thing in the world. I have fleeting memories that come back to me in waves, like a shoe being swept in by the current on a sandy beach, and you look at it and say, that's a shoe. And then another high tide comes in and it's a pair of swimming goggles, and you say, those are goggles. And slowly but surely you try to fit the jumble of puzzle pieces together in your mind. But it's all rather confusing, and when I think too much, my head begins to throb violently. The male and female Bigfoot live in this cave together. That's obvious. I think the female Bigfoot might be pregnant, as there's a very tiny bump in her stomach area, which she's always touching, like women do when they're pregnant. I know my wife did that a lot when she was. I have to say her gentleness towards me is remarkable. She's always touching me affectionately, and forever rubbing leaves on my skin, and giving me this foul green liquid to drink. She mixes it up in an old Coca-Cola bottle, crushing the leaves with a stone until they become a mush, and then she blends them with the water. I keep pushing her away when she puts the bottle to my lips, but she's very insistent that I swallow the liquid, pointing to my wounds. So I know she must have some kind of understanding of indigenous plants. So I obediently drink the vile concoction. In another bottle she puts a piece of honeycomb in it with water and shakes it up for me to have a drink. She gives me another bottle for my pee, which she discreetly discards. In the evening she cooks fish or deer on the fire and gives me the cooked flesh to eat. And even without salt, the meat is delicious. It filters through the cave with a wonderful aroma. I'm surprised the Bigfoots know about cooking meat, but I've also seen the female eating a dead squirrel completely raw. The male Bigfoot is a lot more evasive and reserved than the female. He likes to keep his distance from me, watching me with a wary reticence, as if to say, "What on earth did the wife bring in here?" I'm not sure he's desperately comfortable with my presence in the cave. He watches me warily, as if he's not entirely sure that I can actually be trusted. The two Bigfoots sometimes have little spats together, but I sense the male knows better than to rile the female up. She's definitely the dominant one in the relationship, and keeps pointing to her stomach when the male begins to upset her. He then looks bashful, and becomes more cooperative and amenable. They spend a lot of time in the cave during the day sleeping, But in the late afternoons, evenings and early mornings, they often go out. One day I wake up feeling pretty certain I'm absolutely fine. I remember my name, my wife, my baby, and I know that I need to get home. I indicate to the female and male Bigfoot that I want to go home. It's funny, but when I speak to them in English, they seem to understand exactly what I'm saying. They seem to have the ability to read my mind when they look into my eyes. But they don't seem happy about letting me go. Well, put more simply, the male is very happy about me going. Very eager, in fact, but not the female. He'd like to release me from the cave at once. He's telling the female that I should go. But the female is not happy about this at all. She points to my head, to the bruises, and shakes her head as if saying no. I then tell her I have a baby at home that I need to get to, and everything shifts after that. She understands, so she nods. The husband offers to take me down from the cave. The female agrees. She hangs her head sorrowfully, patting my back gently, and the male throws me on his back like a sack of potatoes and takes me directly back to my camping spot, where I find my tent and my backpack. It must have been an hour or so after the Bigfoot had left that I lose my memory all over again. I can't even remember what my name is anymore, and I feel so confounded, so confused, I'm wandering around in a dither. Niles' account. Me and my wife were on the Appalachian Trail on day 2. We were leaving the Hawks Mountain Camp Shelter, where we'd camped overnight. We'd been having a pleasant camping trip. The weather was terrific, although the nights and mornings were rather cold. We'd been walking for a long time over the earthen trail, and the green shoots of spring were rambunctiously weaving their way through the scenery. It was in the morning we encountered the stranger on the trail, that looked like he'd been attacked by a wild animal, most likely a bear. He was covered in scratches and bruises, his eyes swollen and black, and there was dried blood on his scalp and plenty of missing hair. Some of his injuries had been healing well. His skin was covered with a green hue, the colour of grass, as if he'd been rubbing green stuff all over it. I noticed his clothes were ruffled. There were deep rips in the fabric that looked like sharp claws had torn through it quite badly. I noticed he smelt a bit ripe, not to put too fine a point on it, as if he hadn't had a bath for quite a long time. But stranger than that, he was walking as if he was not completely compos mentos. He seemed disorientated, befuddled, very confused, as if he was in a maze looking for his way out and didn't know where to go. I sensed he didn't know even who he was. It was clear to me that he needed our help. We couldn't leave this man on the trail in such a befuddled state, or he could come to serious harm. "Are you all right, sir?" says my wife. The man looked at my wife with a puzzled expression and said, "Do I know you?" "No, we haven't met. Do you know what your name is?" "I can't remember. It slipped my mind, but I'm sure it'll come back to me. I did remember it earlier on, but I've lost track of it right now." "Do you know where you are from?" I asked him. "I'm not sure," he said. "It looks kind of familiar, but I'm not sure how to get home." We couldn't get any cell phone reception for some reason, so me and my husband decided we would take the stranger back to our truck and take him to hospital. I'm a nurse, my husband is a doctor, so after my husband examined him, we felt he was well enough to walk back to the truck. I noticed he was walking with a limp, but he seemed relatively nimble on his feet, so we went right back to the truck. It took us a long time to get there. I was worried about this gentleman's amnesia, but I knew after tests at the hospital we could find out what was going on with him. During our walk back to the parking lot, he would have brief moments when he would remember his name. Then 10 minutes later he'd forgotten it all over again. He told us he had a wife and baby. My husband suspected he might have been attacked by a bear. By nature, black bears can be rather reticent and tend to avoid human beings, but they will attack if they feel threatened, especially a mother protecting her cubs. We were to learn later that Graham was indeed attacked by a rather belligerent black bear, a very big one. When me and my husband returned to the Appalachian Trail, we found the camping place where Graham had camped out. We made a special effort to look for it, and it was way off the beaten track. It could have remained there for years, clandestinely hidden from all passing campers, who would probably stick to the trail, fearing that if they didn't, they'd get lost. You do get a select few people like Graham, an intrepid adventurer determined to explore the natural world solo. But that comes with some ominous risks and consequences. Alas, a lot can go wrong when you're all on your own. And to top it all up, he did not even have a cell phone with him, which I gather he'd left at home. Graham was a victim of his exhausted state, which revealed to me he wasn't actually mentally equipped to go on this camping trip, as a fatigued body is a body that is slow to react to perilous danger. Let's just say his camping spot was a sight for sore eyes. His backpack had been ripped to shreds, all the food had been taken, and his utensils were lying littered all over the ground, including his bear spray and a rifle that hadn't been touched. We did discover some ice-cold bottles of Mountain Dew propped up in the cold water, and those were the most refreshing drinks we had on that trail. If you stumbled across this haunting sight without knowing what had happened, it would be an airy sight to behold. You would be left with the horrifying impression that something quite dreadful had happened here. I do understand why Graham wanted to camp off the beaten track. Really, I do. But I wouldn't do it myself, especially if a territorial creature like a bear got very upset by my presence. Having said that, if you have a rifle and accessible bear spray on hand, you should be all right. But my advice to you is don't embark on any journey when you're too exhausted. I have seen in my line of work how exhaustion can cause all kinds of accidents, and Graham's exhaustion meant he was slow to react appropriately when the bear came into his camp. By all accounts, his fatigued state could have been his greatest undoing. All I can say is things could have ended rather tragically for him. Thank goodness they didn't. The man is lucky to be alive. Back to Graham's wife. As you can imagine, my husband's revelations about being taken care of by a Bigfoot family after being rescued from a bear attack seemed hard to fathom, but I knew my husband wasn't making the story up, which I unequivocally believe to be the truth, and I believe the female Bigfoot saved his life. So there you are, that's my story. Wow, what an incredible story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.